am the new generation of scary stories. It's time to retire the boring, emotionless voiceovers. With my voice and melody, you will experience the full spectrum of emotions. Subscribe if you like my videos, and also send me your scary stories to my email. And please indicate how you would like me to introduce you in the video. Good luck. Growing up in a small town means that everyone knows everybody and everything about them. When I was in elementary school, there was this kid, let's call him E. I don't want to use his real name. He lived about a quarter mile from my house. His family was extremely poor, living in a very dilapidated trailer. On top of having very little money, they had another son, older than E, who was severely mentally handicapped. He could not walk, could not learn to speak, use the bathroom, or eat on his own. E's father worked in a factory, while his mom stayed home to care for their brother. Even though they had financial struggles, they tried to give their children a safe space to grow up. Even though we lived in the backwoods middle of nowhere town, kids would make fun of E for coming from a poor household. He wasn't always the best smelling, greasy hair, and his clothes were old hand-me-downs. If you know children, you know they can be cruel. They hurled insults and disgust towards him for things out of his control. I never joined in on the teasing. I was friends with those who teased him, but never joined. I would sit next to him on the bus ride to school. Even though we were not friends, we did have one thing in common: Transformers. For his birthday and Christmas, he would always get a Transformer or two. I remember in fourth grade when the live-action Transformers movie came out on DVD. I gave him it as a birthday present on our way to school. Even though we were friendly with each other, the hazing and bullying he faced, along with the hardships of growing up in a low-income household, where most of the attention goes to a handicapped brother, took its toll on his mental health. I saw him every day at school from kindergarten to sixth grade. Watched this kid that acted like any other kid slowly morph into a hermit that never talked and would have outbursts at least once a week. I struggled with school throughout elementary school. My parents decided to pull me out of public school and homeschool me until I was caught up with other kids my age. I was angry about it at the time, but in the end, I was happy they did. We would see E walk down the entire length of the road, which was about 4 miles every day. A scrawny teen talking to himself every day, walking down this road after the junior high got out of school. A year later, in 8th grade, I noticed I didn't see him anymore. I texted one of my friends, who went to school with E, if he knew how he was. My friend said that E had asked a girl out at school and had been rejected and ridiculed in front of everyone in the hallway. He was so angry and mentally unwell that the next day he brought his father's handgun to school. He waited until she went into the girl's locker room. When she entered, he went in after her and pulled the gun out. He raised it up and pulled the trigger. The gun clicked. Luckily, there were no bullets in the gun. A staff member saw him go in after the girl and went to go pull him out. They saw the firearm and tackled him to the ground. He was arrested and served 3 years in juvenile detention for his crime. When he got out later in high school, he was even further gone. He never went back to school. Now every day, all day, he would walk this road, talking to himself, yelling at the cows in the fields and cars driving by. I heard he tried for the military, but was turned away. He wore a military getup with a bomber leather jacket and a beret every day. no matter rain or shine. I was riding my bike to my friend's house. When I passed by him, I stopped and said hi. I hadn't spoken to him since the last day of sixth grade. He yelled at me that he would kill me and my family for bullying him. I just rode to my friend's house and took another way back home at the end of the day. When it was time, I left for college, never thinking about E or his threat again. I came home for summer break after my freshman year of college. I saw him walking down the road. Our eyes met as I drove past him, and he screamed, "Kill!" at me. I knew that he knew what road I lived down, but not the house. I parked in the garage, 'cause I saw him running after me as I turned down the road. I had lost him in his chase. Hard to keep up with a car when you're on foot. I went about my day at home with my parents, and everything was normal. Later that night, I was getting settled down for bed. I opened my window in my room on the second story to let in cool summer night air into my stuffy room. I awoke sometime around 2 a.m. to a creak outside my door, thinking it is probably one of my family members walking in the hall to the bathroom or going downstairs. I went back to sleep. It must have been 20 or 30 minutes later. I heard another creak. I recognized this creak, one I heard every morning when I stood in front of my closet. I shot up to see a lanky figure, lit up by the pale light of the moon shining in through my open window. I quickly got out of bed. It was E. He was standing there. I ran out quickly. I didn't want to fight. I didn't know what he had on him. A gun? A knife? I would rather not find out fighting in the dark. I yelled, waking up my family, as I ran out into the hall and slamming the door behind me. My family came out, and I yelled, "Run." It was at this moment that E ran bolted out the door as well. He sprinted down the stairs and out the door. My dad called the cops, and they came to take our statement. We told them who it was and where he lived. They went to his home to question him. He wasn't home, though, and they never found him. It's been 7 years since that night. I have since moved further away from that house, and so has my parents. I always kept my eye out for E every time I visited home, till I permanently moved away. I never did see him again, and the police never followed up. I feel like I never bullied him or hazed him. I tried being friendly with him when we were growing up. Some people just don't have good mental health. Bullying can further the decline, which in this case, I got the consequences of his childhood. I hope he is getting the help he needs in a home and professionally. Over the health, there was an ancient, crumbling water house where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water. But it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of this incident, it was just a shadow of its former self and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids played over the heath, and they all told us it spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats. So the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were really responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time, so we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us. And so, a half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets, and we were off. There were 5 of us, younger kids. We were all really excited, as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Grand's blackberry pies were the best. Grand's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other, then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did, half because they liked scaring us, and a half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters, and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber, as we remembered the old wife's tale plus urban legend that we all knew about the Waterhouse. The story goes, once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were really nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead, and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang months, although it was never proven how. The bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later, a few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse. Mysterious, hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell, like aging river weeds, was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath, not too far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, but the locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence, further away from the waterhouse, us younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute before being rounded up by the older boys. I'll put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field, where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy sweet blackberries and splashing in the river, and soon the sun was getting low, and it was time for home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering, laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slyly. But being, as it was, getting later, we were feeling wearier and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the water house, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the three older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there. Broove." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh, but A was straight-faced. I said, "I'm going to have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A. We've got to..." Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the two boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did. B picking up my tiny wheelchair, folding it up while running, A grabbing the other two kids' hands, and following B and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. I kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, eh?" "Why, yellow eyes, H hairy face." All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe, and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the water house as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. H just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell, and as that was quite commonplace, over the heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face or find out what it actually was. But us kids didn't go near the water house for a long time after. Okay, so I have an odd story. To me, it's pretty creepy, and I've thought about it over the years at random times in my life. I was a preteen, grew up and still live in a relatively small town in Washington state on the other side of the mountains. From the coast, our town is in a valley, very safe growing up. My mom had a longtime friend from high school, and she had a son my younger brother's age and a daughter a year older than me. So we spent a lot of time together. I was a pretty quiet, introverted kid due to the environment I lived in, which is not relative to the story, but the reason I never spoke about what happened until now. The girl's name was Heather. She was very outgoing, very much a bully. Looking back now, I realize it was her way of survival. With the kind of mother she had, her mom scared the shit out of me. Anyways, I would hang out with Heather, even though I really don't like to, because she was mean. One of the things we would do, that I had done with several friends growing up, was sleep outside in the backyard, without a tent, just in sleeping bags. It was definitely a different era then, no fences. Anyone could have seen us from the road. But there wasn't the thought that something bad could happen. It was summer and we planned to sleep outside, like we had many times before, but this night I just had an awful feeling that something wasn't right. An unsettling feeling. Nothing I can put my finger on. We talked and laughed, and then it got really late, so Heather started falling asleep. Her home was a duplex, one story, with a carport on each side. You could see through the carport into the backyards easily. Residential area, in town. So the mountains that surround our valley were several miles away. The backyard had bushes against a fence that then led to the backyards of the next street up's houses, and then a busy road beyond that street. Like I said, we had slept outside in her backyard many times before, without anything ever happening. This night I had a strange feeling, the one you get when you're being watched, and I stayed laying in my sleeping bag as Heather slept beside me, but kept my eyes open, looking all around us as covertly as possible, trying to figure out why I felt so scared. I realized there wasn't any noise, no cars, driving on the busy road 2 streets over. It was like 10 on a Saturday night. No birds. The crickets stopped. Just pure silence. I get goosebumps now thinking about it. I cannot explain the sickening feeling that suddenly came over me, if it was anxiety or something else. But then my ears started ringing, and it was this high-frequency noise mixed with TV static. It was painful, and as I was thinking about going inside to get my mom and figure out why my ears were ringing and painful, Heather sat straight up, eyes open, breathing heavily. She moved so robotically, but fast. Her head turned all the way to her right, to where I was lying staring up at her, with my eyes wide, and I realized the ringing had stopped. Still no other sounds. She was looking my way, but not focused on me, like she was looking through me. And then she started talking. I thought she was mumbling, maybe sleep talking. And then it hit me that she was speaking some other language. My mom is white, my dad is Mexican, so I've grown up bilingual, and I knew she was speaking another language, and not gibberish, but it was nothing I could put my finger on. She continued to get louder, and I swear everything got darker. The moon had been out, no clouds, so you could see fairly well. And then it was pitch black. As she continued speaking this strange language, it was still silent, but something was moving out of the corner of my eye. I slowly turned my head away from Heather and saw a black shadow. No features, still no noise, and it emerged from the ground in the yard next to us, by the neighboring duplex. I knew it couldn't be anyone from there, because it was a young girl and her toddler, and then an old couple in that duplex, and I couldn't explain what I was seeing. It gradually got larger and was shaped like a cloaked figure, moving very slowly towards us. I was frozen. My fight or flight didn't kick in. All of a sudden, as I'm watching this dark figure slowly creep over the grass, coming towards us, it moves, fast, like a rush of black smoke, right into Heather. She immediately starting screaming the unknown words and shaking. I shot up so fast and ran inside and woke up my mom screaming that something was wrong. Heather's mom heard me, and both moms ran outside. I stood at the back door watching in fear. Heather was laying in her sleeping bag, sleeping soundly. I could hear cars going by, birds, crickets, all the normal nighttime sounds. They looked back at me like I was crazy and woke Heather up asking if she was okay. She said yes, totally normal. And they asked if I wanted to go back to sleep out there. I refused and slept in the living room. Heather wouldn't come inside. The next morning we were supposed to go to church with her grandma. Her grandma picked us girls up, and I sat in the back seat while she sat up front. She hadn't talked to me as we were getting ready and completely avoided me. which was weird because she was the kind of kid who needed to be around people, constantly talking and asserting herself, as her grandma was saying what time we would be back to our moms. I leaned up and asked Heather if she remembered anything from last night. She said no, and I began explaining what happened. The driver's side door was open, and I didn't see her grandma coming up. She heard me asking Heather if she remembered anything and how she knew another language, when I'd known her my whole life and never heard her speak anything but English. Her grandma asked me what happened and immediately asked me what the language sounded like. So I went through what happened without telling her about the shadow or strange, painful ringing in my ears. Her grandma was super serious and took it all in. She don't say anything else or ask any more questions. And we rode in silence to church for the most part, other than Heather telling me I sounded crazy. We usually sat in the middle, her grandma's friends. But that day, she made us sit in the first pew. She held Heather's hand the entire time, praying and crying. It was very out of the norm, and Heather was annoyed and embarrassed and kept trying to bring her hand away. When church finished, we walked back to the car and got it. Her grandma didn't start the car to leave, and instead turned to Heather. I can't remember word for word what she said, but I remember her telling her that she must go to church every Sunday and that she was going to have her stay with her for the rest of summer break. And she said that she would protect her. I think Heather was happy to get away because her mom was pretty abusive. But I knew her grandma wasn't talking about her mom. She said she had met something when she was very young, and it spoke a language that she had never heard before, but she knew what it was saying. It offered her a way out of where she was, that she needed to agree and would be saved, but that she knew it wasn't God, that it was something dark, and that she would rather suffer and die than say yes. I saw Heather less and less, and then my grandparents took me and my brother in, and we lived in the same town, but hung around different groups. So I would see her at school sometimes, but that was it. Our moms remained in contact, and last year my mom mentioned that Heather's grandma had passed away. I said, "Oh, that's too bad. I barely remember her." And my mom mentioned that she had had a very hard life, and that she had been in a concentration camp when she was young. I knew she was from Norway, but had never heard this. I put two and two together, and I believe whatever came for Heather that night was similar, or the same thing that came for her grandma while in the concentration camp. And that night, those odd words are burned into my mind. I've never heard anything remotely close to that strange language since.